John A. Widtsoe was born on the island of Frøya in Sør-Trøndelag, Norway. He was ordained an apostle March 17, 1921. Distinguished graduate of Harvard University and University of Göttingen, Germany, he was a professor of agriculture. And before his call to the Council of the 12, he served successively as president of Utah State University and the University of Utah. Among his classic works are Joseph Smith as a Scientist, A Rational Theology, In Search of Truth, and Evidences and Reconciliations.
Well, long before their call as members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, James E. Talmage and John A. Widtsoe were well known as classic scientists. They had studied, and their works were well received in the academic community.
John A. Widtsoe comes from Europe here, and you know, he really sort of had different phases of his life. He's the educator. He's a man who has strong backgrounds in agriculture. Works with the Agricultural Extension Service for a while. Maybe one of our great intellects in terms of education. I think one of our first apostles to hold a doctoral degree. Did his master's degree at Harvard with honors, and then goes back to does his bachelor's degree at Harvard, goes back to Germany to do his master's and doctorate at a German university, and comes back as a very fine scholar, but spends his time again with what we know now as the University of Utah, the Utah State University, before being called to the Quorum of the 12. I've always appreciated Brother Widtsoe's collection of sort of answers to gospel questions that came to be known as evidences and reconciliations.
I think that's a book that I use a great deal and look to, and I think that is one of those that is an answer to very common questions that people had about Latter-day Saint theology, and that he was able to address in a very reasoned but profound way.
In a way, James E. Talmage and John A. Widtsoe are a generation apart in some respects, and they were voices raised up for their times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, for example, and this has real relevance today, I think of one little piece from Evidence and Reconciliation. One of the questions someone wrote in was, is it wrong to doubt? Mm-hmm. And his response, you'd think he'd say, oh no, doubt is healthy, but he doesn't. He says, questions are natural.
Right.
But
cynicism
and skepticism can lead to doubt, which canker the soul. Mm-hmm. And I think it's wonderful counsel where he goes on to say, questions are fine. And if you do have a doubt, it should only be a temporary circumstance, mm-hmm. because learning, growth, questions, answers will change all of that. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, as a college student, I read Brother Widtsoe's Rational Theology. And I loved it, and I think it was a wonderful way to put it. It is. Mormonism is a rational theology in the sense it's explainable. It's something that makes good sense.
Yeah, President Hinckley had even said that. You remember he talked about how the gospel makes sense. And I think that's one of the great contributions of these educators with a little bit of learning theory, how to get from point A to point B, so that when you're all done, you can see how all of the pieces interconnect, yeah, and how the dots are connected.
I think that it's really quite significant to go back to where we started and to recognize that oftentimes the works that we recognize the name and we've kind of enshrined were written before they held office or position. Mm. That's an important lesson to every Latter-day Saint, you see. You can write, you can think, you can know, you can understand.
And you don't have to hold major church office.
And you don't have,
Spirit still directs you.
Yeah, it's not an office. Knowledge is not an office. Understanding is not an office, you see. And I wouldn't suppose for a moment that they had an aspiration for office. I don't think that motivated their writing. I think it was a keen desire to know and understand, and they're both born teachers and love to teach, and in that day, a lecture was a much more formal kind of thing, wasn't it? And so you prepared it in detail, and so it flows into book form very naturally. But But I think there's just a great lesson there.
Brother Johnny Widtsoe did a paper, a presentation of the Genealogy Society of Utah called Temple Worship.
Yeah, it's magnificent.
And that particular piece is a remarkable classic,
Well,
which we will
still
be featuring.
we still quote it. We're gonna cite it in this set. It's one that I don't think I've ever taught a temple prep group that I haven't referred to Brother Widtsoe's wonderful article on.
And it being quoted even in our generation shows you that these voices, though raised up maybe a generation apart, nonetheless they did have something that is timeless too.
Well prepared. Well prepared.